So these are very trying times. I'll give us our introduction. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm here in Rome. I came into the office this morning. It was eerily quiet for those who have ventured outside at all since the lockdown. The coronavirus is affecting, I think, everybody, both individually and as states and the international community as well. It's truly, I think, a global phenomenon in a way that few would have anticipated, that a pandemic would have happened now and would have affected so many different sectors and affect so many people. Of course, yesterday in Italy was one of the worst, most tragic days that we've had so far, with more than 4,000 new cases being reported and more than 450 people losing their lives. It's a very sad time for us here in Italy and throughout Europe. It's a sad time around the world. There's three key points I think that I would like to raise in relation to the reason why we chose having, coping with coronavirus as a series, because actually it's affecting everybody, as we know. But there's also a great deal of isolation that comes with the lockdowns, and there's a great deal of isolation that's coming, with the breakdown now or the closure of the Schengen space, of airspace, of travel, and thankfully for products like Zoom or platforms like Zoom and others in social media, we can keep in touch with people. Otherwise, the isolation would just be, I think, too extreme. But with isolation, a lot of frustration, and together that's also producing a lot of fear. People are genuinely afraid of what the future has in store. There's, I think, a lot of uncertainty. There's economic uncertainty. There's, socio-political uncertainty, and of course, with the pandemic, there's health uncertainty. And I think I'm not the only person, I believe, in this world who, every time they cough or feel a little bit of pain in their neck, or walking constantly back and forth to get the thermometer to check my temperature, I think that's the uncertainty that's coming with this virus is producing a lot of individual angst and anxiety, which is why having a coping with coronavirus series was thought up by us to break the isolation, for us to engage with each other and to meet our friends and colleagues when otherwise we're locked away at home. It's also a way for us to talk to experts about what's happening, so we can perhaps reduce the fear, because there's a great deal of fear that's being produced in these times, and that fear is going to be clouding our judgment. So rather than simply going into Twitter or Facebook and hearing an avalanche of opinions about what's happening, it could, I think, be very useful to our audience, to people, to be able to hear from the experts and also engage with them a bit later on. Today we are going to be joined by Omar Al-Ubaydli, who's coming from the Bahrain Center for Strategic International and Energy Studies in Bahrain. We'll be joined by Andrea Spinelli Barrile, who's here in Rome with me. Not with me, as you can see, he's enjoying the great outdoors. Andrea is one of the founders of Slow News, which is a news organization here in Rome. He's also a very established journalist. We're also with St-Pierre, who's the CEO of the Modern Security Consulting Group in Berlin, in Germany. Hello, Velina, welcome. And we're also joined by Velina Tchakarova from the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. So welcome, everybody. I've noticed that we already have 35 participants, and I guess that number will keep going up. So I won't keep you much longer before I turn over to the panel, but I would like to go over a little bit of the structure for today. So now, starting with Omar, then going to Andrea, Jan, and then finishing with Velina, we will if each of you could do a kind of 5-minute general introduction to your specialization and to your aspect or focus in relation to coronavirus. After that, I will ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then I will open up to the audience, to the wider audience, to pose questions, which I will then read. I won't open up the microphone and the video for them. Who knows what state of affairs everybody's in. But I will rather read it on their behalf. So without further ado, Omar, if I could turn the floor over to you to open up.
Thank you, and thanks to the audience, thanks to EGIC and Mitchell for inviting me to participate today. I hope that everybody is in good health. I'm an economist based in the Gulf, but I won't talk too much about oil prices. This is obviously a global pandemic, and the concerns extend beyond the narrow issues relating to oil. There are a variety of short-term and long-term costs associated with the pandemic. Overall, a pandemic isn't of major concern in the broader scheme of things in terms of the economic impact, because at the end of the day, it's one hopes a one-off event. The last thing that we experienced that was of comparable order was the Spanish flu, which was in the early 20th century. So one of these things once in a century in terms of the direct economic impact is not a major concern. The major concern that appears in the longer term relates to the path of certain economic structures we have in the global economy at present. In particular, since I would say we've had sort of globalization increasing steadily since World War II, with a sharp uptick in the early 90s after the Uruguay trade round and the collapse of the Soviet Union. We've seen a lot of integration in the global economy. And that integration has been very important in improving living standards in the developing world and in enabling countries to be much more productive and efficient by exploiting economies of scale and by linking their economies to other economies. There are some questions about whether that's potentially damaged some working class living standards in some of the richer countries, but there can be no doubt that globalization, judged at the global level, has been a positive thing, especially in terms of raising living standards in developing countries. The fear is that there's been a backlash towards globalization in the last 10 years, especially since the global financial crisis, and some of the more recent episodes are familiar to some of the panelists. Mitchell, before we started, was talking about Brexit and how that's been impeding the UK's medical response or health-based response to the crisis. But we've seen similar shifts to sort of more xenophobic and nationalist rhetoric in a variety of countries, France, in the US. Macron is very much in the globalist vein, but these antagonists, these opponents, the National Front and their analogues in various other European countries are increasing in influence. And the fear I have as an economist with interest in political economy is that, first of all, these sort of populist and xenophobic and sometimes, I hate to say it, fascist parties are going to gain in influence as a consequence of the pandemic. You saw yesterday Donald Trump tweeted concerning the virus and described it as the Chinese virus, which is obviously clearly not a slip of the tongue. It's designed to galvanize the electorate in a certain way and to carry a certain favor with a certain subset of the voters. So there's going to be an increase in the political antagonism towards economic integration, which will hurt living standards in all countries for the usual reasons that trade enables specialization and exploitation of economies of scale. We're going to lose all of that. And secondly, even setting aside xenophobic propensities that may be activated by the pandemic, we also have the fact that certain countries may strategically, if they feel that they've been damaged by their interlinkages on an economic level. For example, the fact that lots of factories in China have closed, has impeded or disrupted supply chains of companies in the US and companies in Europe, ones who purchase semiconductors and outsource certain components to East Asia. Their production has been impeded, and their outputs and employment has all been affected adversely as a consequence of their integration. And so what we might see is that a justifiable response in the short term is that countries may look to relocalize production or re-regionalize production at the very least, in an attempt to avoid dependence and economic contagion resulting from similar style pandemics or other crises in the future in other countries. And this is not good for the global economy because it reverses a lot of benefits we've seen from globalization. And as I say, the biggest losers will be developing countries, which are already struggling for a variety of reasons, among which climate change, and that's not going to go away. And to add to that, having the Western economies close to them in terms of supply chains, in addition to what we're seeing already, which is in terms of migration, and, education, and all sorts of conventional economic opportunities. So these are the long-term adverse effects that I'm concerned about. You guys are in Europe. I think I saw a statement by the Serbian president this week saying that the EU is something along the lines of the EU is just a dream on paper, and that the only people who've been able to help us are the Chinese. And so this sort of anti-European rhetoric, this disintegration of the European Union is not just some academic, academic point to discuss. It's now becoming a reality that people have to confront with grave economic consequences for many people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very good way to get started because it's looking at many of these very negative phenomena that are really unfolding, and we're going to have to deal with them. I'll turn now to Andrea, who has experience in dealing with pandemics in the past and has written extensively and actually was an observer, I believe, to the Ebola outbreak. And so perhaps, Andrea, you can give us a little bit of your insights into this phenomenon.
Yes, thank you, Mitchell, and thank you for all the participants and all the speakers here. It's a very great pleasure for me to participate to this very interesting conference, and I think also very, very useful conference. As Mitchell tell us before, if you read on Twitter or if you're watching on TV, all day we are talking about this outbreak, this pandemic, about coronavirus, a lot of opinions, but the result is that the public, the common people, me too, because I'm not focused on science, are totally out of the reality. We are just in opinions, but not into reality. So I can manage some of my best skills and some of my previous job during the Ebola outbreak, for example, in Liberia, to understand how to move inside this media pandemic also, and to understand how to manage yourself in your house, because we are all in lockdown. So that means what I learned from Ebola outbreak in Liberia. I learned that sharing data is one of the most important things that the nations, the research centers, the universities, the doctors, the hospitals have to do as a first thing. Is one of the most important things, because without data, you cannot understand how the outbreak, how the pandemic is moving, and so how to respond to the pandemic. What I also learned from the Ebola experience in Liberia is that collaboration between health system, NGOs, doctors, and common people also is the key to find a solution after the outbreak. I mean, we are in a pandemic time. And so the risk, the social risk, one of the most important social risk actually is the stigma. So point to a people or another as a stigma because you are affected by this virus is one of the most worst thing because it's destroying the society. It's like terrorism. Terrorism I'm focused on Africa, so I can explain how terrorism work in Africa, is pointing a very small situation as markets, as in general, places where people in a few numbers can stay together. And that means that terrorism want to change your life. It's more or less what the virus is doing. Actually, we are changing our life. We are totally locked down inside our houses in Italy. And so life is totally different than before. And so we have to fight against this. We have to fight to be strong on our brain and on our confident, as for example with the family and with the friends. All day we chat with Skype calls with some friends from elementary school, etc. This could be a good way to front this incredible situation, this crazy situation here. I see the response in Europe. When I was in Africa, 3 weeks ago, I was in Ethiopia covering the sixth session of the Congress of Freedom of Research in the African Union. And what I learned from African perspective of the coronavirus is that it's just a virus, it's just a flu, it's not so dangerous for the people. Maybe yes, but maybe no. Africa now is just starting to fight against this virus, but they are moving together. 54 to 55 nations moving all together, sharing data, first things, and it is a very important way, and education to the people. This is a stage, a starting point, very, very interesting, because in Europe doesn't work like this. Actually, now Europe, after 2 weeks of pandemic, is starting to work together, to sharing data together, to understand what happened in all the continent before now. And that was a problem. And that will be a problem for the next 2 or 3 weeks more. And so here we are. But one of the most important things, in my own opinion, is sharing data, sharing knowledge, sharing experts, sharing not opinions, but facts is one of the most important things that we have to do now.
Thank you for your opening remarks. Two points, just as I'm thinking about them. There was the revelation yesterday that actually a lot of cyber disinformation campaigns have been launched, trying to make the situation worse in the European public thinking and in the United States. So people are exploiting the fear factor. And the second thing that ties actually both of your, the first two panelists' thoughts together is in Africa today, there's a debate that's going on about preventing European migration. Just to put that into, because of the spread of the coronavirus. And so some African countries, very ironically, are now, well, not ironically, are telling the Europeans, we don't want you here right now. And so there's so many dynamics that are at play, and we'll come back to that when we get to our question and answer. So I'll turn now to Jan to carry on the discussion, who's also actually building on both of your thoughts.
Yes, well, again, thank you for the EGIC for organizing this. It's a nice experiment. So far, so good. Hopefully it turns into something regular, even without a quarantine or a lockdown. I'll also link up to some other things that Omar and Andrea mentioned, of course, with xenophobia and extremism. My specialty is terrorism and counterterrorism. And I have to admit, I do have a guilty feeling talking about this, because it seems I'm always the bearer of bad news. And the last thing we need right now is just always more bad news. But yeah, terrorism hasn't stopped, and extremism hasn't changed because there's suddenly a virus or pandemic. It's actually sharpened, and it's sharpened in various ways. The most significant one is that regardless if you're far right, far left, religiously motivated, it is that the pandemic provides justification for your position. The far left will say, well, we're seeing the consequences of globalization. We were right. This is, capitalism must change. What we're seeing right now is a product of the capitalist world. And so we need to fight that. That needs to change afterwards. We have the possibility right now to change those things. Religiously motivated will see that as a punishment from God, or whatever religious figure or you want to use as punishing the unfaithful, the apostates. And this rhetoric is actually very, very strong, and it's one that feels, again, that justifies years, if not for, in some cases, where they feel decades of propaganda. And it ties into a mentality and into an approach where it combines both the dogmatic and apocalyptical element, but with also very rational aspects. A lot of what was said last week about ISIS's An-Naba magazine recommendations about avoiding Europe. Well, it's not necessarily a travel ban by ISIS again for its fighters or for its supporters, but it's more saying, look what's going on. We're getting help. Things are, stay away from those areas. But at the same time, try to encourage it and see, we're getting the support that we need from a metaphysical level. And then we go into and Omar alluded to this, and Andrea as well, into the far right scene and the prepper scene, which is taking this very, very seriously. They're seeing this as the moment they've been waiting for, the apocalyptic day, the day X that is coming, for which they were preparing. And they see a lot of it framed within conspiracy theories, which of course range from Doom or the other video games that sort of prepared this. I know some people linking logos of Chinese firms with video games, saying, well, see, it's actually, the message was actually there, to more classic tones of saying, well, the Chinese are doing this because they want to disrupt our economy, or it's actually created to prevent Donald Trump from being reelected, and so on and so forth. And they're tapping into this in a way that if they feel vindicated, and that I think that part is very interesting, because this is how they spread their message, and there's a sense of reinforcement, and it comes with a call to action. And on another level, a less metaphysical level, you have the far right scene that is, of course, then calling, as mentioned, for a sort of epuration of or cleansing of migrants. The virus is portrayed as being foreign in nature, as another sign that borders need to be closed, that only pure nations and pure people can survive together, that any elements that to disrupt this let's say this purity, this cohesion, are not desired, and that a process needs to begin to get rid of these impure or these disruptive elements in our societies. And this is right now, the pandemic is indeed acting as a call to action for a lot of the extremist groups. I'll finish, because I could talk all day about this, but obviously I'll finish with one key element, is that Mitchell mentioned it in saying, well, the disinformation, the propaganda. The worst part is not the propaganda in itself. It's actually the willingness to believe it. I think what is helping a lot of the propaganda, the extremists right now, is the desire, the lack of trust towards classic institutions. I know enough people in Germany saying, well, the Robert Koch Institute, they're too close to the government. We can't trust their numbers. We can't trust what they're saying. I'll rely more on the WhatsApp messages that are being sent to me saying that this shop is closing and this and so forth. And so the full-fledged crisis of confidence that we have for our institutions and our decision makers is really laid bare, and is fostering a lot of the extremist rhetoric. And I think we're about to see a lot of the actions pop up in the days and weeks ahead, but also afterwards, how they'll deal with all of this.
Great, thank you so much for that. This is, I think you're right, this is getting to be quite an interesting discussion already. I will turn immediately to Velina to give her opening remarks, because I can see that time is ticking and we're going to be very strict on time today. So Velina, go ahead, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, on my side, very short introduction. I'm the head of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. We are dealing with global trends, with security and defense policy. We are very much intertwined with the decision makers on the input side of the political box here in Austria. That means that we are supporting these processes, feeding them with a lot of research information. We are screening all signals that might give us an idea or information about or are indicative of shifts or wildcards or game changers when it comes to global affairs. And of course, our main focus is the European perspective. That means all of these global developments, systemic processes are assessed, analyzed in terms of the implications for Europe and for Austria. So my special focus is the global system, anything that has to do with systemic risks. So now we are moving from the bottom up that has been outlined by my colleagues prior to my introduction. We are moving now to the top down. We are moving to the helicopter view of current events, and of course, with regards to the pandemic outbreak. So, in this regard, I've been following the events from day one. Of course, with the main question, what it means for the global system once the COVID spreads globally. And I also claimed already in the mid of February that the disruption of the global supply chains that was quite obvious to happen due to the lockdown in China will be, so to say, the canary in the global system mine. And now, a month later, we are actually seeing already the ramifications. So I actually claimed a month earlier that we are going to witness the next major shock to the global system, one that probably we could compare only to the global financial crisis from 2007, 2008. I think it's going to be even larger in terms of implications for everyone, developed economies. And in this regard, now I'm observing, of course, the reactions by the key players, the key stakeholders, not only the decision makers, but also the institutions. And I don't mean the restrictive measures coming from governments right now. In my sense, that came too late. They had enough time to prepare properly for this outbreak. They didn't take the time, and now they are more or less in a sort of a reactionary mode here in Europe, but also in the United States. I also claimed at the beginning of March that Trump would likely actually will not be beaten by a Democratic candidate, which now will be obviously Biden, but more or less will be beaten by himself for the upcoming elections due to his reaction to the coronavirus crisis, but also due to his handling of the crisis. And I will stick to this claim. And of course, what is important to understand is that there is this one layer above national governments and above national decision makers that is very much not anticipated. that is the rift from this kind of interconnectedness between the main socioeconomic systems. It's an unprecedented phenomenon that has been launched after the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was not only unanticipated, but also unforeseen. So this outcome of globalized networks, of finance, of economy, of trade, even if you like, of diplomacy and political links, currencies, and so on and so forth, was actually an unforeseen consequence of the globalization. Now we are witnessing it with the global outbreak of the COVID, how these networks are crumbling down, and even with the very solid response of institutions such as the central banks. I mean, if you have checked the news from the last 2 days, what the Federal Reserve, the ECB here in Europe, Bank of Japan have been pumping into the economy, to revive them and actually to keep them alive, trillions of dollars altogether, and still markets are crashing. Still, you see how this is not enough. This is very indicative of this interconnectedness. And I think this will be one of the lessons, unfortunately, a very painful lesson. Last time, in 2007 and 2008, we didn't learn the lesson. The so-called too big to fail banks that were bailed out by the central banks, and they were actually the cause for the great financial crisis. They were saved. Now, in this Corona crisis, it's not going to be about the too big to fail. It's going to be about too many to fail. That means that the entrepreneurs, the small businesses, the people will have to be saved by the central banks in order actually to keep this global system the way it is alive, to keep actually national economies alive. If they don't learn this lesson, if they don't get this lesson prior, to the next actions and measures, it's going to be devastating. It's going to be actually, the outcome will be a complete collapse. And I think that none of the stakeholders want to face it right now. So we are going to see a lot more of what has been already launched. Like I said, this 800 billion, it's just unthinkable. I mean, even a small scale country like Austria has launched a package which is 10% of the GDP right now. And it's going to be more. So too many, to fail is going to be the new agenda. This is what we are going to face. I, of course, agree with my colleagues when we talk about, sharing information, sharing data, but I'm going to talk about it more in the next phase. I just wanted to outline a few key points on my side for the introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, you brought up a very important point, Velina, that I think I can start the discussion with, which is about lessons. Because actually, people, because of the widespread conspiracy theories and all the hidden messages about what China tried to do or will do or is doing, we do forget that they were affected by a very similar disease, SARS, about 20 years ago, and they learned important lessons about preparations, how to stockpile medical equipment. They built a hospital in a week. Now those hospitals are closing down because they've taken, their cases are decreased as well. Be that as it may, I would like perhaps first to ask Omar if you could tell us a little bit about what kind of economic lessons you think we should be learning from this experience, given the economic impact that we're feeling now and that we're likely to continue to feel. Thank you.
To be honest, I don't think that there's that much we could have done in terms of preparation beyond, there's the issues of the logistics and so on and so forth. But this is not, this is in 2008, I mean, Velina mentioned the crisis in 2007, 2008, and this is potentially even bigger. One distinction I would draw is that in 2007, 2008, there were clear flaws in the financial system that exacerbated the problems and people caused them. And there's, a pretty logical, 1, 2, 3. If you'd done 1, 2, 3 before, you wouldn't have had the mess anywhere near as large. On this occasion, the majority of the problem is a public health issue. It's not reflective of flaws in the way the economy is arranged. You can have a communist system, you can have a capitalist system, you can have a left wing, right wing, whatever system you have. Just the fact that you have billions of people in the world interacting and because of the globalization, I don't think there's any configuration of economic policies which, if you had in place beforehand, would have softened the impact. The only thing that you can do is make sure you have the right health infrastructure and plans. I mean, we were talking before the talk started with you, Mitchell. You mentioned how the UK is playing catch up now. So clearly they had a process, and that process, in retrospect, wasn't where it should have been. I think I'm not a public health expert, but from reading, Singapore seems to have had a very good process in place, and maybe if we'd all done what Singapore had done, things wouldn't be as bad. But yeah, I would say that in terms of lessons to be learned on the economic side, there's not really that much, and it's more on the public health side. However, I would say that in order to stabilize the situation economically, you need to have an effective state. And in the case of the US, which is the most important economy in the world, we're seeing in plain sight that the state is much less, the state capacity to do anything is very limited and vastly lower than what it needs to be to respond to a crisis of this magnitude. They're still debating lots of details regarding what they actually want to do in terms of rescue package, and then there's going to be, I'm sure the Democrats and Republicans, probably more the Republicans and the Democrats, will be torpedoing the other side's proposals, and the people paying the price will be the impoverished who will be slow in receiving the resources they need. So you need to have capable states that can deliver the aid packages effectively, and they can in particular identify who's in need. This is not something where you just need to spend and then the problem goes away. It's very important that you spend in a targeted and an effective way, and you're able to isolate the people who need the assistance, small businesses, the people who've been laid off, the people who have mortgages, and can effectively deliver aid to them. This is not one way you just need to spend. So I would say that's what it is. But all of that is second order to the reforms that need to be done on the public health side. And Andrea mentioned the issue of sharing data. That's just one facet of it, and I'm sure many other reforms will need to be implemented.
Thank you. Actually, because we're in a little bit of a time pressure, so I will also be including questions that are coming in from the audience. So I think for this one, I will direct it to, well, anybody can chime in when they would like to. Maybe just kind of wave your hand if you want to add something. But I will direct this first question to Jan. This is from Arthur de Lidekerke, who's basically asking to, how do you tackle disinformation? Particularly, I know it's not a small question to answer. We deal with this in peacetime. So how about during conflict? Not really conflict, but waging the war against coronavirus. But I think it's a very important question to ask. How do you deal with disinformation when our sources of information are basically not trusted by people, and others, cyber, you can even call them cyber terrorists or cyber insurgents, are trying to create more disorder on the backs of this crisis. So Jan, how do we deal with this disinformation?
I was hoping that Arthur was going to watch the webinar today, because he recently wrote a great paper on disinformation. So I'm glad the question came up. That's pretty cool. If I have that perfect answer, I'll probably need to sell it. We're a private company. No, it's essentially, it begins, for me, it begins with credibility. And I think credibility is very often defined when you're tested. And we're seeing around the world institutions and actors being tested, and some of them are up to the challenge and some aren't. And I think that's going to play a big role in that credibility. And the other one, no, and that will take time, by the way. Credibility is not built overnight. You know, it's like a reputation. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a degree of openness as well. But again, I think the current times provide the challenges that can help foster credibility. The other one, in relation to the information, is you know, again, I tweeted about this earlier this week, but when I was a student, I was told, you know, don't do an information, you know, try to avoid information bulimia. That was essentially trying to get too much information to the point where it became contradicting, very confusing. And we're experiencing this right now, is that we're looking at our phones, at every type of data from every type of source, and we get so confused because the numbers, the advice are so contradicting that we then turn to essentially emotional security. We're no longer about facts and data, we're about the emotional comfort that the information can provide. And if it's someone that you know, or someone that that you think is probably more aware, that disinformation will sound more credible because the emotional response is there right now. So I think, you know, long-term, the credibility, but short-term, making sure that the messages you know, support or are in tune with that need for emotional security right now. We're seeing it right in the toilet paper crisis. You know, people absolutely want to buy this, and there's it sounds weird, but you can tell it's not a rational reaction. It's an emotional one, and right now it's about providing emotional comfort to counter emotional discomfort.
Sorry, just a word to our audience. Please, there's a little button for you to push for Q&A. I see that some of you are writing comments on the chat. They get lost because of all the messages that are there. Please direct them entirely to the question and answer section. I will follow up with what Jan was saying with a question both to Andrea and to Velina. Which is basically individual education. Can there be a way for individuals to be educated in this type of crisis management? Because otherwise, you know, we're all prone to this disinformation. And because we're going online and we want to break the monotony of, you know, looking at your four walls every day, we go to the internet, and they were confronted with, you know, all kinds of disinformation. So how, or what kind of mechanisms can we put into place to help educate individual people? Andrea, followed by Velina, please.
Okay, thanks for your questions. It's very interesting. What I learned from Liberia experience during the Ebola outbreak is that educate people means help them, spreading them good information. Basically, wash your hands. Liberians learned this lesson. So if you today go to Monrovia, for example, you can find soap and water out every shop of the city. And that means that Liberian people learn the lesson. But how? They learned the lesson thanks to the healthcare system, because they spread a lot of ads in the TVs, on the radios, and spread a lot of this kind of good information. So how people can help themselves, washing the hands, no direct contact, keep away, social distance, etc. during the outbreak. I mean, this is not what Congo is doing. And so what we have seen in Congo is, now is finished the Ebola outbreak, but starts a new morbillosis outbreak. And why? Because the sanitary system, the health system, never spread good information to the people by radio, by newspapers, by TVs, etc. And so it's a very, very important. Actually, in Italy, we are watching the TV, for example, all the time. Every 10 minutes, we are listening for some good things to do, washing the hands, etc., as ads from the government, from the Italian government. Is okay. On the other way, people have to educate themselves by themselves. I mean, the overload information, for example, that we are talking before, is a problem. Yes, it is, because if you are all day stay with this rumor in your ear says that situation is going worse, people is getting out the houses, people are crazy, the virus is unstoppable, we don't have a vaccine, we don't have a cheap test, etc., is put inside you and in your mind a lot of fear. So switch off the TV, switch off the radio. You don't need too much information. You need just, for example, two media coverage per day, one in the morning and one in the night. The rest of the time you can spend to read a book, stay with your kids, relax yourself. I don't know, work, because we have to. And so, but don't listen all day to the radio, to the TV, etc., because they are confusing you. It's normal. It's normal. It's the media coverage of an emergency. So it's normal that we have 24/7 channel TV spreading news, but at the end it's the same news all day. So don't be scared about that. Switch off the TV, open a book, enjoy your time. Try to keep a resilience into yourself. That's could be a good way to approach this phase of our life.
Thank you. Velina? We don't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. So on my side, I agree with my colleagues. I will add another layer to the discussion. The disinformation campaigns right now are just incredible. I mean, some examples were mentioned. I myself am placed, like I said, on the level of decision makers and institutions, so systemic level, and I can give you some examples. The case with Serbia was mentioned when the Serbian president basically, well, actually it was the prime minister, but the whole leadership went out and said that there is no European solidarity. Basically, China makes more for Serbia, which is absolutely not true, because Serbia is in fact one of the biggest recipients of European Union funds, loans, financial support in the whole world, not only in Europe. Okay, and that's the reality check. So another very good example was about Italy, the case of Italy, that there is no European Union solidarity coming to Italy, but in fact it was not the European Union as an institution, it was actually the European member states who were in that first phase very egoistic to think about themselves in first and foremost, and there was indeed in this first phase no solidarity coming from the member states, from the countries in Europe. But then again, the European Commission pressured countries like Germany and France to actually channel support to Italy. So then again, we have this very clear case at the systemic level, which is now not particularly due to the COVID crisis, and the global outreach, but it's actually already taking place due to the trade dispute between United States and China. And as you know, there is now this huge disinformation campaign where Chinese diplomats are actually trying to shift the blame for the virus on the US, and even when it comes to the name of the virus, there is a very strong effort on the side of China, to actually not place it as a Wuhan virus and so on and so forth. Okay, so what can be done? I would add I agree with the previous suggested actions and measures. And I would add that we also need a very bold leadership. We need that our leaders, our political decision makers, that these are the people who have to take the responsibility in such crisis, have to be very bold and have to be very transparent in such times. That means they have the tools, they have the technologies to come to the people, to appear probably once a day. I totally agree, we don't need 24 hours news and statements, but once a day, a short update, what is going on right now, what are the measures that the government is taking or the institution is taking, what is coming out directly from them, so that we don't need we don't need mediators between us, the citizens, and the leadership. Okay, so if you have a bold and transparent leadership, if you have these decision makers, and unfortunately I cannot give you many examples about it right now, okay, specifically here in Europe, now they are coming out with statements like yesterday, for instance, Merkel went on TV and made an unprecedented strong message, but now they are under pressure, so they have to do it. What I mean is right from the start, you go to the people and say what's going on, what's wrong, what can be done, what is going to be done, okay? This is something that can really close the vacuum between citizens and decision makers.
Thank you very much. We're actually running out of time. We have 4 minutes. We have 4 speakers. So it's I think it's a good way to wrap up. I know, and I'm very sorry that not all the people who ask questions will get those questions read out. I will make sure to forward them to every one of the panelists, just so at least they know what is on people's minds. I will say the following, however: there are some areas that people are more concerned, I can see in the questions. For example, people are concerned with food security. People are concerned with the price of oil and the oil price war that's unfolding at this time as well. People are concerned about socioeconomic questions, socio-political questions. What kind of mechanisms can be put in place to kind of reinforce, our kind of global socio-economic and socio-political system. And so if I can ask, we can go once around the table. Keep your remarks really to 60 seconds. That would be fantastic to keep us on time. So let's go in the order that we started. So we can start with Omar.
I'll take the question on oil. Very succinctly, the long-term path of oil prices is unrelated to the corona crisis. At the moment, it's down, and it's created a bit of tension between some of the producers. But in the long term, the determinants of oil prices are going to be things like global population, the shifts to renewable energy and electric cars, and so on and so forth, and the state of the global economy. And in all these situations, the coronavirus is of second-order importance. It just so happened that there was a dramatic fallout between what looked like a fallout between Saudi Arabia and Russia, coincidentally at the time the coronavirus reached its peak in terms of its impact on oil prices. But no, it's mostly a red herring, and oil prices are still facing the same threats they've faced for the last 5 years, and it's still unclear what the future is, but it's not looking particularly rosy at the moment.
Thank you. I'm sorry, who was next? Andrea, please.
Okay, thank you. What I want to do is share with you good news, because I think that good news can help us to override this period. The good news is that 5 days ago, the Institut Pasteur in Dakar, Senegal, present a COVID test, which is very, very cheap because it costs $1, and it's very, very fast because it takes 10 minutes to give you the response. This test, it works like a pregnancy test. So you have to put a drop of blood or just a drop from your mouth in this very small case. And it works like a pregnancy test. Or there are lines and show you if you are infected or not. This test is realized by the Institut Pasteur in Dakar and an English company. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name now, but I can check very fast for you later. And it takes just £1 million found from the UK government 2 weeks ago. Good news can help us to front this lockdown period, this strange period, and maybe in a few months we will remember this as a turning point of the humanity. We are living the story, so just try to understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, I thought the question about politicians breathing life into the conspiracy theories or the disinformation, so it was interesting. So I'll just jump into that one real quick. We can't, human beings remain human beings. That means if they see an opportunity or a short-term benefit to a dire situation, a lot of them will actually try to use it, and we're seeing that very often on political levels right now. Again, on the extremist side as well. But there's a lot of people see it as something where they can capitalize on short term, and I think this need is creating the circumstances where indeed some conspiracy theories get a legitimacy they shouldn't normally have. That is a big problem, and as Velina mentioned, it's about proper leadership, clear leadership at this point in time. And that will again help with the disinformation and the overlapping of information we're getting at this time.
And last word, but not least, Velina, if you'd like to wrap up in our
I feel terrible because I have no good news for you. Sorry, guys. Sorry. But Mitch knows me. I'm always true to myself. I cannot give you something that I don't think, I don't mean. I see that the global system right now, the global affairs, so the system is not anti-fragile at all. I'm expecting next major financial shock. This one probably will spread the contagion even in much higher speed than the last time, which is also not good news for us. And we have much more systemic risks than last time. And this COVID crisis is now exemplifying it, how quick not only the pandemic is spreading, but also the implications from the pandemic are spreading throughout the world and are reaching very, very quickly all parts of all continents. And for me, clearly the signals will be if the central banks, the Federal Reserve and other central banks of developed economies can no longer mitigate the systemic risks. So because this will be the shift, this will be really clearly the tipping point. Maybe kind of a positive thing is that all decision makers right now, no matter where, are in this whatever it costs mode. This is the good news for us citizens. They have realized now they have to save us. So like I said, the focus will be on too many to save, whatever it costs, whatever it takes, because they know if they don't do it, the whole system will crash.
Well, normally I like to end on a more positive note. So I will put my 2 cents in. 2 things. First and foremost, this is not the last of our discussions. And I think that it's positive that we're getting these kind of chats happening. I've already received some nice feedback from our audience that this is something that they look forward to. They would like to have a longer period. So we'll think about whether we can do a longer event next time. So this is part of the collaboration and the sharing of information and sharing of ideas. And so thank you so much to all of you for coming, for turning on your computers and joining us in this very global conference. But I also want to add one last point, and that is that it's not all doom and gloom, because at the same time, new energies are being unleashed to try to solve this crisis. And all kinds of new startups from one side of the world to the other are trying to find, from vaccines to new types of materials, to new technologies, to an assortment of different things. And they're doing so through that same process of connecting to each other, collaborating, and you know, sharing of information and data. So I think that there's also a lot to look forward to. This seems to be a dark chapter in globalization. It's the negative side of globalization, this spread, and also the way that the instinct, sorry, that was me moving my hands while talking. But the gut reaction is to close borders and to put up walls. But actually, when people start thinking rationally, they know that in cyberspace, using your computer, you can collaborate irrespective of the challenges that you face. So on that note, I would like to again thank everybody coming from Bahrain, from the other side of Rome, I suppose, from Berlin and from Vienna, and from everybody who's been listening and paying attention to us today. Look forward to seeing you at our next Coping with Coronavirus session. We'll keep you informed, and look forward to our future dialogue. Hopefully we can see each other in person sometime.